Support comes from Austin Water. With winter weather arriving, residents and businesses can prepare now for the possibility of severe and freezing temperatures. Like having emergency supplies such as water and insulation for pipes. More winter preparedness tips at austinwater.org.
No matter where you are, it's a new year in Texas. What's in store for 2024? From politics to tech and more on today's edition of The Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Coming up, two experts on Texas politics with what the political landscape looks like and the stakes as we head into a major general election year amid growing rifts among Texas Republicans. Could the new year mark a tipping point for Texas Democrats? We'll take a closer look. Also, a forecast for the energy industry. Tech expert Omar Gallaga and the Standard's own Shelley Brisbane look at what's buzzing on the technology front. Plus, coming attractions at the theater, books with a Texas twist, and a whole lot more as our preview of Texas in 24 gets underway right after this. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this first day of the new year. Hope your 2024 is off to a happy and peaceful start. Now, these days, peaceful and politics are seldom words found in the same sentence. There's a saying often used by folks who write about this stuff. The saying goes that culture is upstream from politics. Now, whether that's true or not, it's anyone's guess, I suppose. But when you think about it, compared with movies, school, the media, everyday life, you might think that politics plays a relatively minor role for most, unless, of course, you're directly involved with politics yourself. And with culture wars raging on several fronts, that axiom about culture and politics might suggest a political landscape filled with pothole detours and major drop-offs. Well, this much we know. Texas's culture is changing with shifts in demographics, changes in priorities. And going by the axiom, we should expect our politics to shift as well. Hence an often talked about blue wave expected to sweep through Texas politics, one which, to the chagrin of many a Texas Democrat, has yet to materialize. Then again, the red wave that Republicans predicted nationally in 2022 didn't hold water either. And as we head into what appears to be another potentially wrenching presidential election season, there are serious questions for a Texas where we're seeing divisions within the GOP party and Democrats increasingly frustrated with the agenda of Republican lawmakers from Governor Greg Abbott on down. What does it all add up to for the coming year in politics in Texas? Well, to help us with all this, we're joined by two guests. Rebecca Dean is a professor of political science and associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Arlington. Professor Dean, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us, Alvaro Corral. He is professor of political science at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Professor Corral, good to talk with you.
Good to talk with you. Thanks.
Let's begin with a big statewide race folks will be watching most certainly this year, and this is the race for U.S. Senate. Ted Cruz up for re-election after his tight victory over Beto O'Rourke back in 2018. Rebecca Dean, who seem to be the top challengers this year for that Senate race?
Well, it's going to be U.S. House Representative Colin Allred from up here in North Texas. He has raised the most money of the field so far, about $10.6 million, and he's got a good deal of that still cash on hand. And then right behind him would be State Senator Roland Gutierrez out of San Antonio.
Who do you think has the name recognition advantage there?
Well, I think it's regional. I mean, I think that probably Allred, he got some statewide press when he upset the incumbent, Pete Sessions, for that seat back in 2018.
Right.
But, you know, Gutierrez has that Central Texas, South Texas support.
Very interesting. But, you know, I want to shift to you, Alvaro Corral. Democrat hasn't won a statewide race in Texas since 1994, I believe. You have any reason to think that this year will be any different?
You're right, David. It's, I think, pretty easy for Democrats to get pretty dour about this near 30-year losing streak. But I would say that there are a couple of things that may be giving them a bit of hope. I've long said that if Democrats want to get an upset victory, there needs to be sort of a perfect storm of factors. And they actually have potentially a few of those things working in their favor. One, Democrats need high turnout, right? And having a Senate race that coincides with the presidential election race is just, on average, I think, positive for Democrats who may be able to capitalize on some energy if they have it. Going after one of the weaker GOP senators, who by far is Ted Cruz, who's the most polarizing, has high negatives, so potentially a little bit more vulnerable. Obviously, he's coming off a sort of 2018 battle that made him sweat, right? And three, which is that sort of X factor issue, which may be abortion, right? The post-Dobbs decision here in Texas is only now, I think, starting to trickle down to voters, and that may be, again, the sort of X factor that could drive enthusiasm among Democrats who are kind of starved for it with an incumbent, in President Biden, who maybe isn't doing all that well in the polls, right?
Yeah.
So that may be something that they can rely on.
Very interesting. I want to ask you about that, Rebecca, because you think about how Texas has been in the news for its strict abortion laws, effective abortion ban, really. What do you think of the idea that women who might have previously voted Republican or perhaps didn't vote in elections past might help Democrats this year in Texas?
Well, in order for, I think Professor Corral is exactly right. In order for Democrats to do well statewide, they have to increase the enthusiasm. They have to get strong mobilization. They're not getting that with President Biden nationally. He's got an enthusiasm gap. So I think potentially that that issue of abortion that's not only in the news but so salient for women might be that factor. Additionally, sort of suburban Republicans that we've watched swing back and forth, women Republicans that we've watched swing back and forth, probably are not enamored of President Trump, who looks like is likely to win the GOP nomination again. So I think there's possibility here.
A number of Republicans running for U.S. House seats has significantly increased compared to the last election cycle. What do you think is contributing to the rise in challengers, and how might that more crowded field affect candidate strategy in upcoming elections? What do you think, Alvaro Corral?
Yeah, so in political science, we kind of have this a bit of a truism, right? That candidates are strategic. That they're pretty good at reading the political winds, and Republicans are probably sort of wetting their chops, right? In an otherwise sort of weak year potentially for Democrats, can they capitalize on a sort of weak top of the ticket, and will that help them down ballot? And again, I think something that we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? The sort of fissures around the Texas GOP. Yeah. That's something that lots of candidates may be looking to exploit. Can I be in the good graces of Governor Abbott? Can I be in the good graces of Paxton? Can I capitalize on a small issue here and there that can give me the advantage in a crowded field? So I think that may be something that's driving the kind of rise of GOP candidates.
I noticed that several of these open seats are in North Texas, thinking of the House seat Democrat Colin Allred's leaving to run for Senate. We were talking about that earlier. And then you have the retirement of Republicans, Kay Granger, Michael Burgess. Professor Dean, do you think that their seats are going to be safe within their party or not so much? What's your take?
Oh, I think they're solidly safe districts. In the last cycle, Allred won with over 65% of the vote. Mm-hmm. And then with Granger and Burgess, they were redistricted to be even more solidly. Sort of you think about the DFW area and little spokes shooting out from that.
Right.
The Granger district has all of Parker County, and then the Burgess district goes almost all the way to Bridgeport, west of the area.
Well, I want to shift to some state politics here because to say it's in disarray, at least among Republicans, might be an understatement. Governor Abbott's been endorsing primary challengers running against lawmakers who voted against school vouchers, including some who've been critical of him in the past. What do you think this says about his approach to building support for his priorities? Is this effective? And what does it mean sort of writ large for Republicans in Texas? What would you say to that, Professor Corral?
Yeah, I would say that Governor Abbott has shown himself to be incredibly laser focused on delivering something on education, specifically, this very large push for school vouchers that Republicans couldn't deliver during these 4 special sessions, right? I think even the fact that he just went to 4 special sessions, there's talk of him calling another one in the next spring potentially, right? I think that really speaks to his his own sort of focus on this issue. There were, of course, these 21 Republicans in the Texas House who voted against the voucher bill ultimately, and he seems, again, laser focused on and eliminating that obstacle, that sort of roadblock. These conservative Republicans in mostly rural areas, right? He may be saying, well, I can likely find another Republican in this very conservative part of Texas who agrees with me. So I think that's been his approach.
Yeah, but I'm curious. We haven't even talked about one of the biggest political. I don't know how to even categorize this. It was certainly a spectacle, to say the least. We're talking about Attorney General Ken Paxton's impeachment trial. And again, similar to what we were talking about with Governor Abbott, we heard Ken Paxton saying he's, going to come after some of his political opponents. And I wonder, Professor Dean, if you think that this is going to be felt in the primaries and beyond this year in Texas, or if people are paying that close attention to who people like Paxton or Abbott are supporting.
Well, Paxton is doing his level best to make it relevant. He has said very explicitly that he was going to go on a campaign tour to hunt out the people who had opposed him. And you really see it in two different ways, right? He's going after leadership that you would expect. So he's going after the speaker, and he's going after the impeachment manager, and the person who chaired the investigative committee. But then also the entire delegation of his home region of Collin County and Denton County. He's endorsed and or funded contributing funds to the challengers there.
Do you think that the presidential sweepstakes here that's going to galvanize Texas voters? Let's just, while we're with you, Professor Dean, what do you think?
I think potentially Paxton draws on that same slice of the Republican Party. Really what we're seeing is a fissure in the party from the sort of more extreme MAGA, far right leaning, and the sort of country club business types. And that would be best represented traditionally by Governor Abbott, though he did move a little bit more to the right in his last reelection. So it's potentially to the truth that having former President Trump at the top of the ticket might get the strongest base excited.
Professor Corral, do you agree or not so much?
I would agree. I think that, Donald Trump is really the sort of elephant in the room, for lack of a better word, right? And I think that to a certain extent, a lot of what we've been talking about may very well shift depending on whether he's at the top of the ticket, just because he brings his own sort of X factor to the race, whether he can mobilize his very, very loyal base of support, which is very strong here in Texas. So I think that the presidential race will definitely inform just about everything up and down the ballot.
Alvaro Corral is professor of political science at the University of Texas, RGV. Rebecca Dean is professor of political science and associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts, UT Arlington. There's a whole lot more of our preview of Texas in 2024 just ahead. Stay with us.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Center for Proton Therapy, offering radiation treatment that precisely targets cancer with a focused proton beam just a few millimeters wide. More at texasprotons.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Consumers who bought a U.S.-made electric car last year were able to take up to $7,500 off their taxes, thanks to a tax credit included in the federal infrastructure law. But that has changed for 2024. EVs from Ford, GM, and Tesla qualified in 2023, but as of now, you won't get a tax credit if you buy a Chevy Blazer, Cadillac Lyriq, or a Ford Mustang Mach-E. Some Tesla Model 3s are only eligible for a credit of $3,750. It's all about where the materials that make up the batteries come from. There's a provision of the infrastructure law that kicks in today, preventing EVs with batteries containing Chinese materials from qualifying for the full tax credit. Some of the automakers are trying to fight to change that in this new year, but you'll definitely need to check with each car maker to find out whether the EV you want will still get you a bonus from the government.
Support for Coverage of Business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider committed to protecting Texas employers by investigating fraud and focusing on preventing abuse of the system. More at texasmutual.com/fraud.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Predicting what's in store in a market as volatile as the energy sector is far from a precise science, but Matt Smith, energy analyst for Kepler, keeps his eye on certain factors, and he's been keeping an eye on a lot of things for 2024. He joins us now. Matt, welcome back to the Texas Standard. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too, sir.
Well, last we spoke, gas prices were way down. What are some of the key themes in the industry that you'll be watching for in 2024 as we look more broadly at the upcoming year?
Sure. So several things, David, that are on our radar. The first is really geopolitics. The last couple of years, we've had a really crazy time. You know, the year before last, we had Ukraine, Russia, and that has continued now for the conflict there for nearly 2 years. And then we had last autumn everything with Gaza. And so the concern is that we're going to continue to have these geopolitical hotspots going forward here, which cause more volatility in the market, but just generally more volatility on a general basis. So that's a concern as we head into 2024 here. The second, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom on you, but is that we could be seeing a recession in the US. We've been particularly resilient over the last year or so, but we're seeing Europe that's about to fall into recession, and the US, after all these interest rate hikes over the last year, you know, and trying to get inflation down, we're likely to see growth slowing. And so that's a worry in how that impacts oil demand. And then the third piece really is just supply and demand for oil. There's always these two sides of the scale, right, which are trying to balance each other, but inevitably they it's impossible to do. So we that's going to be a factor going forward here, whether supply growth continues, particularly whether it's out of the US and Brazil and Guyana and Canada, as we have been seeing, and whether we see OPEC, you know, the Middle East producers and West Africa and that continuing to keep barrels off the market to support prices. And then, as I mentioned, on the demand side is just those recessionary concerns. So those are just some of the things that are on our radar heading into this year.
Well, let's talk about the supply side for just a moment, because as you mentioned, there was a lot of concern about what the war in Ukraine would mean. A lot of those concerns were, frankly, looking in the rearview mirror, they seemed to be overblown, because there was the production sufficient to keep gasoline prices certainly low in the United States, despite all this geopolitical uncertainty. What do you think accounts for that as you look back over the year that was, and what can we extract from that as we try to think about 2024?
Sure. Well, two things really, David. One was that you had really strong growth out of the US last year. That's not something we're going to see replicated this year, but those additional barrels coming to market and the US getting to a record production level of over 13 million barrels a day, that has helped things along with growth elsewhere. But really, the reason that we didn't see prices really going crazy over the last couple of years because of Russia is because Russia is still getting its supply to the market. And so, you know, the US and EU, they want to punish Russia by reducing their revenues, but they don't want to halt all their flows to the market, because that would cause a price spike. And so there's a delicate balance there.
Yeah. Well, now, we've got a lot of things on the calendar for 2024, not the least of which is this U.S. presidential election. You think that's going to have any impact on prices?
Absolutely. So that's going to be really interesting in Q3 going into Q4 of this year, simply because the US is so focused on the price at the pump there. You know, we've been lucky enough to have low prices over the second half of last year. Yeah. But you have an inverse relationship, right? In that as prices at the pump go high, and particularly at extremes, you see a president's popularity going in the opposite direction. So you will see the U.S. administration trying to keep oil prices and keep prices at the pump down as we head into this election, because it's so important. But on the flip side of that, you have other countries and kingdoms such as Saudi Arabia and OPEC that know this, that will be looking to keep production cuts in place to support oil prices. So it's going to get really interesting, I think.
And then you've also got the situation in Gaza with Israel, and you've got proxy fighters backed by Iran doing their best to try to control flows in and out of the region. And we haven't touched on this, but then you've got this spat between Guyana and Venezuela. Venezuela claiming historically that they have some kind of claim to oil discovery off the coast of Guyana. And this goes back to border issues that are more than a century old when you get right down to it. Do you think any of that's going to have an impact on oil prices in the short term?
I don't think so. I think the situation with Venezuela there is more posturing than anything else. The Maduro is trying to garner favor as he heads into an election this year for Venezuela. So I don't think there's any concern there. In fact, that's probably bearish for oil prices in the years ahead here, simply because Guyana is going to be adding so much production to the market. It really is a success story, and that's kind of why Venezuela is trying to do a kind of a land grab there, simply for that reason. But fortunately, it seems that that's just a war of words, and there won't be any escalation there, hopefully.
Let's talk about renewables. Texas #1 in solar power, wind power, we should point out, and there's been a real race for solar. Of course, coming out of the COP summit this in December, you seeing 2024 as perhaps being a tipping point year when it comes to renewables, or not so much?
And more just that continuation of the trend that we've seen in place, right? So particularly in the US here, we have such a focus on 2030 and reducing emissions by that point. And so really 2024 is just going to be part of that trend. But Texas is well ahead of many other states already on that side of things. So nothing too pivotal on that side of things. The more interesting development going forward here is going to be in terms of electric vehicles and the penetration that we see of those making their way into the general pool of vehicles as we head towards the end of this decade. That's more of a thing to watch.
Matt Smith is energy analyst for Kepler. We talk with him every couple of weeks here on The Standard. Matt, thanks so much for the look ahead, and happy 2024 to you.
Same to you, sir.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. AI everywhere. Chaos on the platform once known as Twitter. Ongoing criticism for Silicon Valley companies, often referred to derisively as big tech. 2023 was a turbulent year, to say the least, when it comes to the tech industry. But what's in store for 2024? Today we're talking with two folks who spent a lot of time thinking about tech trends and share their thoughts right here on The Standard. First up, you recognize him, our go-to tech expert, Omar Gallaga. Welcome, Omar.
Hey, David. Happy end of year.
Yes, likewise. Happy 2024. Also with us, Shelley Brisbane, a producer reporter here on The Standard. Also spent many years covering the tech industry. Hi there, Shelley.
Hey, David. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. AI, I guess that's the term for 2023, especially thinking about the impact of tools like ChatGPT. From term papers to love letters, I guess they could pretty much handle it all, even doing some programming. Omar, how do you see AI evolving in 2024? What will folks be doing with it?
Well, if you write me a love letter with ChatGPT, I will be able to tell, first of all. Let's get that
you
out there.
will. You'll recognize that. Is that what you're saying?
I can tell. I think everyone in the tech industry and a lot of people outside of it are just obsessed with AI. I mean, that's all we seem to be talking about these days. And I think that will certainly continue in 2024. I predict we're going to see people finding more uses for AI that goes beyond ChatGPT prompts and generating fake images. I think we're going to see lots of areas of creativity around video editing, around creating AI generated music. I mean, we have a new Beatles song because of AI. So I think people are going to find ways to clean up music, generate new music. And also areas like healthcare and robotics. I've been doing interviews with people in those industries lately for some stories, and I'm hearing lots of exciting things about how they think AI is going to change things and transform those industries. So I think there's going to be backlash from people who still think it's moving too quickly and are afraid and feel that we're just not ready for those implications of what AI can do. But that's ongoing. I don't think that's going to change.
I feel like we're asking the wrong questions when we're talking about AI because we're sort of using an old model of moving from the analog world into the digital world. You know, we've seen how media companies treat user data and that sort of thing, and how much access one company gives another company's products on its platforms. But something tells me that the rub when it comes to AI is way beyond that. It's just that a lot of us just don't know how to ask the relevant questions. Shelley, do you know what I'm talking about here?
Well, I do, because I think the focus is so much on things like ChatGPT and generative AI, which is how consumers interact with it. But I know my mailbox, and probably Omar's, are full of emails from companies that are talking about how they're going to leverage AI in whatever industry it is, whether it's healthcare, or construction, or housing, you name it.
Real estate, anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is not even contemplated in terms of whether the government regulates it or whether we as individuals think about how AI might be part of our lives. And I think the companies have incredible financial incentives to maximize the way they use AI. And I don't really think we've contemplated that from a regulatory point of view. I mean, as a consumer, we might interact with AI in healthcare settings or in transportation settings or any number of places that we don't expect it. And frankly, that we feel a little unable to control it or grok how it might impact us.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears, or we can let the robots do it for us. Talking about these self-driving cars here, they sort of seem to come to a screeching halt late in 2023. What's a backstory there, Omar?
Well, I mean, we've had some incidents of these self-driving cars not performing up to what the standards should be. So we had a company called Cruise that had to suspend its operations. You know, they were doing some self-driving in Austin and had planned to spread through other cities in Texas, and they had to kind of stop what they were doing because they just weren't performing up to what they needed to. But they're still happening. You know, we're still seeing self-driving cars in other places. I just took my very first Uber ride in a Waymo in Phoenix recently, and I was impressed with the experience. I actually felt very safe in the car compared to how I would feel with a human driver. I think human drivers are terrible. I am of the mind that these cars will in general be safer than cars driven by humans. But whenever I talk about it or whenever I post anything about it, people I know recoil at the idea of giving up control of their vehicles. So I think that's going to continue to be the ongoing debate is, you know, do we trust, and AI is part of this too, do we trust these self-driving cars more than we trust humans on the road? I don't trust anybody on the road. I don't trust myself on the road.
Hey, listen, I definitely hear you. Shelley, I know that you follow the Apple ecosystem quite a bit. What do you think of its $3,500 headset they plan to start selling this year?
The product Apple is coming out with is the Vision Pro, which is this augmented reality, virtual reality headset that is basically supposed to put a computer on your head. So whereas existing headsets let you play games and do all sorts of cool virtual reality things, this is really as intended as, if not a replacement for your computer, a way for you to interact with a computer environment in an almost physical way with hand gestures and eye gaze that allows you to move things just by looking at them. And the people who have seen it say it's amazing. But the cost of it and just the sheer inexplicability of the technology to people who haven't seen it, this thing called spatial computing, which is a combination of AR and VR, I think is going to mean it'll take a long while before it's adopted or something that all of us are using. But if you have an iPhone today, you can take spatial computing images that will eventually be playable on the Vision Pro. And so you can essentially get a 3D effect. And so that's Apple's way of seeding that technology to people who may not be able to buy that headset. And so I don't think in 2024, everybody will be running around with these headsets. But I think in a couple of years on and beyond, spatial computing will be something that we have to talk about as another computing platform, whether we as individuals like the idea initially or whether we have some skepticism about it. It's coming.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but, the age of social media is over, or at least so a lot of people were saying with the demise of Twitter, or at least the transformation of Twitter into X. And, there's a lot of social media companies now in the middle of change. Does this idea that social media is now behind us, does that ring true to either of you, or is there something out there that will replace some of the social platforms that are transitioning right now? Omar, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the era of social media as we knew it, where everybody was flocking to, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook every day and spending hours, I think that part's over. I think where people's eyeballs are going are places like TikTok and social video, of course, AI, as we've been talking about. But I do think what's going to happen in 24 is either a major player is going to step in and take over one of these social networks the way Elon Musk took over Twitter. I think that will probably happen, or there'll be some consolidation. And I think people are just going to keep moving away from it. I just don't see these networks being as active. I don't see people using them as much. They're losing some of their relevance and authority. So I just, that whole spread to other networks like Threads and Mastodon, I don't ever see any of those getting as big as what we saw in the past.
What do you think, Shelley?
Yeah, Twitter really functioned as a town square, especially for people in the news business or who followed the news, but for a lot of other communities as well. And I think without that town square, people have found other ways to amuse themselves and inform themselves. So whatever these companies do, I feel like people have found that they can get by without this daily or hourly dose of social media hits, whether it comes from Twitter or Facebook or Mastodon, whatever your choice is. I think relationships with social media are really changing, and also just what is possible to get out of it, because Twitter doesn't function as either that town square or that daily newspaper or the hourly newspaper that it once did. So if that's what you want from social media, it's hard to find a place that really feels like what Twitter used to feel like.
Shelley Brisbane is Texas Standard producer, reporter who leans in hard when it comes to technology. And Omar Gallaga covers technology for Wired and other fine publications and joins us here each week on The Standard. Omar, Shelley, thanks a lot.
Thanks, David.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. New Year's means lots of folks have made resolutions, and if yours was to read more books, we've got you covered. We take our book coverage very seriously here at the Texas Standard, and we wanted to preview some of the big releases readers can look forward to in 2024. And we turn to the perfect person for that. Here to tell us more about what to look out for, Steph Opitz. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships at bookshop.org. Bookshop.org is an online retailer that supports local independent bookstores. Steph, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What's a book for a younger reader that you might be able to give us a heads up on coming out in 2024?
I'm going to start with the youngest reader. This is a great, fun picture book coming out called Ahoy by Sophie Blackall. The premise is really some kids are supposed to clean and they come up with a distraction from their parents, which is very relatable in my own home. So I'm really excited to get this book. And Sophie's a celebrated author and illustrator, and she's always coming out with great books.
What about young adult books? This has been a huge category, I know. Is there anything coming out big that you're looking forward to?
Yes, and I love to always preface young adult by saying, even if you're an adult, you can read it. It's not just for the teens. There's a lot of fans out there that love the YA books. So there's one that I'm really excited about called A Drop of Venom. It's by Sajni Patel, and it's a retelling of Medusa combined with Indian folklore, which I love a good retelling. And this one has a lot of feminist rage and just kind of fun visual elements. And I think it's going to be a big one for the teens and those of us that are still teens on the inside.
Sajni Patel, is this a first for this author, or are you familiar with their work?
This is not a first. She has written a lot of books. I think that this is maybe one of her more darker books, but she's a beloved and prolific writer, so people might have already heard of her name.
Well, now there are two big sophomore novels I know you particularly were excited to talk about. What were those?
So I'm really excited about Tommy Orange's second book. It's called Wandering Stars. Tommy Orange was the best-selling acclaimed writer of There, which was probably one of the books that I recommended most in the last 5 years. And Wandering Stars is it's a sequel to There, but it jumps around in time and goes further back. and then catches up with the present day, but it really takes place and starts off from the end of there.
Oh, okay. So it's not a sequel so much, it just picks up with the story.
Yeah, it picks up with the story. So, I think people are really going to be drawn to this book. He's such a muscly writer. He's so engaging to read. So I think this is going to be on a lot of people's lists.
And I believe finalist for the Pulitzer Prize several years ago, if I'm not mistaken, as well, Tommy Orange. What about the second book in this category? Again, we're talking sophomore novels here.
Sophomore novels. Yep, we've got Kiley Reid, and her book, Such a Fun Age, was another big one. It was a Booker Prize finalist. It was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. So her new book, Come and Get It, takes place in 2017 at the University of Arkansas. And it has a lot of different characters, but it kind of circles around a visiting teacher, a visiting professor, and an RA in the dorm. And Kiley always kind of looks at race from a lot of different angles, class, and I think it's going to be I keep saying this, but I think it's going to be another big book. And she is just one to ask really provocative questions. So I feel like it'll be a good book club book for people.
A lot of buzz around Kiley Reid. What year was that Such a Fun Age came out?
That came out in 2019. The very end of 2019.
Yeah, right. Well, now, anything for our nonfiction readers? I know biographies are hugely popular. History lovers, of course.
Yes. So Erik Larson, who so many people are familiar with, has a new book out. And I have to say, I am late to the Erik Larson train, but I did just read Devil in the White City, and I see what all the hype is about. And now I can't wait for this next one. It's called The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. So this book is really taking place between the election of Abraham Lincoln and up until the start of the Civil War. So it's a tight timeline. It's 5 months, but it's really intense. It's exciting. It's terrifying. So I think this is going to be, the book to pick for those of us that love a good nonfiction page turner.
Yeah, sounds like an Erik Larson book for sure. I know In the Garden of Beasts was huge. You mentioned the book on the Chicago World's Fair. That was In the White City or something like that.
Yep, Devil in the White City.
Devil in the White City. That was what I was thinking of. And what both of them amazing books. Over at bookshop.org, are you spotting any larger trends in the book selling business that perhaps we should be aware of, or book lovers in general should be wary or on the lookout for?
Well, this is the most fun trend that we see because we support independent bookstores, is that people are shopping at independent bookstores and bookstores are opening, and that's a really exciting thing. But I'm sure you're talking about the trend of books. And because we look at such a wide scope, it can be really hard for me to hone in on something that I'm seeing a lot of. There's just so many exciting books coming out next year that I feel like I need a month off of work just to catch up and do some reading.
I totally get that. And you were telling me that you were involved with the Texas Book Festival some time ago.
That's right. Yes, the Texas Book Festival is dear to my heart.
Well, then you know, I mean, avalanche of books that come out every year, and I know this coming year is likely to have a whole new harvest. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing these days at bookshop.org. What is it that bookshop.org does, in working with independent booksellers?
We really support their e-commerce abilities. Some bookstores are, too small to have a staff that can help with online sales and online and shipping and all of that. But we also, when people come to our site, they can select that that a purchase supports their local bookstore. So every single purchase on our site, a percentage of it goes to support local bookstores. And I'm looking at the ticker right now. In the 3 years that we've been in business, we've raised over $29 million for independent bookstores. So shopping on our site directly impacts. And if you're in Austin and you're buying a book from our site, you can select Book People, and your purchase can support them from our site. So we really just say, go shop at your local store, and if you can't, we'll help you out.
Steph Opitz is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at bookshop.org. Steph, it's been great to talk with you. Thank you so much for those terrific suggestions. And by the way, listeners, if you missed out on any of those, we'll have a list over at texasstandard.org. Happy New Year, Steph.
Thanks. Same to you.
Coming up on 49 minutes past the hour Texas Standard Time on this special New Year's Day broadcast. And if one of your New Year's resolutions is to stay up to date on all the news from across the Lone Star State, we got an easy one for you. You can sign up for the Talk of Texas. It's our weekly newsletter from the Texas Standard, and it's free. Just go to newsletter.texasstandard.org to sign up. We got more of our special coming up. We'll look at some of the most anticipated movies of 2024. Stay tuned. You got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown on this New Year's Day, where we're taking some time to look at what's to come in 2024. And now our attention turns to the big screen. From superheroes to the super serious, we're always looking for those movies with Texas ties, don't you know? So what's some of the most anticipated releases for 2024? Well, to talk about that, we're joined by Eric Webb. He is an Austin-based freelance pop culture journalist and a film programmer. Eric, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hey, Dave. It's great to be here.
You recently wrote that one of 2024's big themes will be sequels and remakes. I was just looking at some of the most anticipated movies coming out in 2024, and it does seem like a lot of franchises are getting some second wind after a lot of years. There's Twister. There's going to be a Twisters. I'm not sure if that's a formal sequel or not, but a lot of people drawing a connection there. Perhaps the return of the Alien franchise. What are you hearing when it comes to sequels and remakes?
That's right. You hear a lot of people talk about how they're tired of Hollywood sort of recycling old ideas, but if people are concerned about that, 2024 is not the year for them to go to the movies then. It's kicking off on January 12th with the Mean Girls musical, which is kind of being marketed actually as a straightforward remake, but really is a musical based on the Broadway show. Mm-hmm. And then we're also getting, like you said, a lot of long dormant IP is getting new life through reimaginings, reboots, or just really long delayed sequels like Twisters, which you mentioned, which is being billed as sort of a new chapter of our famous flying cow cinema.
Right.
And then we've also got Gladiator 2 coming from Ridley Scott. And
oh boy,
I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen Gladiator. Yeah. And Roadhouse, actually. There's going to be a new remake of Roadhouse starring Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, wow. Well, that's really interesting. Well, I mean, some of these sound pretty intriguing. I want to turn to some movies with Texas ties. I understand a release date's been announced for Jeff Nichols, The Bike Riders. Jeff Nichols, an Austin director. Remind us a little bit about Nichols and what do you know about the film?
Sure. Well, he is probably best known to Austin moviegoer or Texas moviegoers as the man behind Matthew McConaughey's Mud, and also movies like
Great
Exactly, and movies like Loving, and his films tend to have a very sort of southern atmosphere to them. The Bike Riders actually is based on the 1967 photo book of the same name about a motorcycle club. And it stars Austin Butler, who people remember from the Elvis biopic and from him continuing to talk like Elvis for months thereafter,
right.
As well as Tom Hardy and Jodie Comer. And it premiered at the Telluride Film Festival in August, and due to the SAG-AFTRA strike, it kind of got delayed, and there was some uncertainty over its distribution, but now it is set to come out on June 21st.
Well, one to watch for. Another one that a lot of Texans are going to be, well, a lot of folks all across the nation, really. A new one from Richard Linklater. Tell us about Hitman. What do you know?
That's right. Well, really quick, it's important to note that movie release dates change more often than Texas weather, so everything's kind of up in the air. But there's actually no release date currently announced for Hitman, which is, as you mentioned, the newest one from Richard Linklater, which sees him reunite with Glenn Powell, Austin's own, who he collaborated with on Everybody Wants Some and Apollo 10.5. This movie is based on a 2001 story at Texas Monthly by Skip Hollandsworth, actually. It's about Gary Johnson, a man in Houston who posed as a killer for hire on behalf of the police, and intrigue ensues after that. but it premiered at the Venice Film Festival in September, and it's already been acquired by Netflix. There's information about it up on the Netflix website already. So I would, like I said, no official release date announced yet, but I would say that people should keep an eye out for that one because I would expect it to drop in 2024.
You know, I think about all the many movies that have been inspired by Texas Monthly articles. It just really is amazing. Shifting gears to Dallas director David Lowery, who's releasing Mother Mary this year, at least at last word. What can you tell us about that?
Boy, I love David Lowery. The Green Knight is one of his movies based on the Arthurian legend. That's one of my favorites. He makes very dreamlike kind of indie cinema. Mother Mary is from A24, which is a very popular sort of indie studio.
Yeah.
And we don't know a whole lot about it yet, actually, but it's supposed to follow the relationship between a fictional musician and a fashion designer. And it stars Anne Hathaway and Michaela Cole, two actresses I really love. And we do know that it filmed in Germany in 2023 during the strike because A24 had interim agreements with the Actors Union for a lot of its projects. So when you look it up in the trades and stuff, it is currently slated for a 2024 release. But like I said, we'll see if that happens.
You mentioned A24, and I think that's the production house behind Alex Garland's upcoming Civil War, which has been getting a lot of attention online, most certainly. Texas plays a big role in the plot, and I believe there are some Texans in starring roles in this film too, eh?
Oh, that is so true. Austin residents Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons, who people remember from Friday Night Lights, of course, they star in this movie. It's, as the title implies, it's a very dystopian story, and we've already seen the trailer. And it sort of imagines exactly what the title implies, a civil war in America, a second one at least. And Alex Garland is known for kind of groundbreaking, thought-provoking, speculative sci-fi like Ex Machina and Annihilation. And so in the trailer that fans have already seen, they can see that California and Texas in this Civil War scenario are allied. And that has caused quite a buzz on the internet because, as you can imagine, Texas and California don't end up on the same side of much of anything.
Wouldn't expect them to be allied in a movie thinking about or at least imagining a civil war, but at least that's part of the premise here.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out in the plot.
Yeah, for absolute sure. We're almost out of time, but I have to ask, since we've got you here, if you could only go see one movie on the big screen this year of the ones that we know of, what are you most excited about? What would it be and why?
Ooh, I will tell you. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which is currently slated to come out in May. It is a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, which is one of the best movies of the past 15, 20 years, I think. It's certainly the best in the Mad Max franchise. This one is a prequel telling the story of Furiosa, who is the character originated by Charlize Theron, but will be played by Anya Taylor-Joy in this movie. And it's also got Chris Hemsworth, who you know from Thor, and who is just one of those people that it doesn't seem fair that he is so handsome and such a good actor. So I'm really excited about that one.
Eric Webb is an Austin-based freelance pop culture journalist and film programmer. Eric, thanks so much for your preview, and happy movie watching in 2024.
Right back at you, David. Thanks so much.
Well, that's all the time we have on the big broadcast as we ring in the new year. We're so glad you spent part of this New Year's Day with us. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Kristen Cabrera, Alexandra Hart, Michael Marks, Lori Martinez, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer. Leah Scarpelli is our director. Casey Cheek is our technical director. The managing editor of the Texas Standard is Gabriel Munoz. Our managing producer is Laura Rice. Our executive producer is Rhonda Fanning. We're going to be back live with you again tomorrow, and we certainly do hope you can join us. And by the way, don't forget about our podcast. You can find our podcast on any of the platforms out there, wherever you get your podcasts, as we like to say. And it's a great way to keep the Texas Standard with you no matter where you are traveling as we wrap up this holiday travel season. I'm sure we'll be talking about that and a whole lot more when we're back on the air tomorrow. I'm David Brown on behalf of myself and the entire Texas Standard team, wishing you a very happy and healthy new year.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.
A devastating winter storm, millions without power, hundreds dead. How could this happen in the energy capital of America?
The market was killing people in their homes, and I had lost faith in it. And every decision we made at that point forward was to get the lights on.
I'm Mose Buchel. I'll be your host for The Disconnect, Power, Politics, and the Texas Blackout. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.